My name is Anne-Marie Davis, and I am the Japanese Studies librarian at the Ohio State University Libraries, and I am an associate professor. These scrolls are two scrolls, and they're in a really nice wooden box held at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. And they are also part of the Manga collection, which is one of the largest collections in the world outside of Japan. One of the strengths of our manga collection is that it is very historically oriented, and so it has a lot of precursors and unique ephemera and art pieces that have been called manga before the modern concept of manga kind of evolved in the post-war era. So these are from the 1920s, and they do a really great job of kind of showing that history of the evolution of manga. They were created in 1921 by a group of about 18 key manga artists that were hired by Tokyo's top newspapers of the day. And they had formed actually an association called the Tokyo Manga Association, and they were exploring what it was that they wanted to call manga, kind of pursuing manga as a concept for a new genre of art, but also popularly accessible art, low-level art, if you will, that was also kind of satirical or comedic in a way. And so they created these scrolls that focus on the 53 stations of the Tokaido route. As I was saying earlier, they're really historically important, and for people who want to study the history and evolution of manga in Japan, they're absolutely critical for kind of understanding how early 20th century artists were conceptualizing manga and who some of the first professional artists were and the big names in the industry before World War II in Japan. Another reason we focused on these scrolls was because I've been working a lot with the East Asian Studies Center, OSU's EASC, because they have a whole package of K through 12 teaching materials on the Tokaido Road. And so this was a really great opportunity to bring that story map that I had created in 2020 with Josh Sadvari together with actual images that we could share with teachers and the public. They feature the Tokaido Road, which is a truly historically key part of Japanese history. And I would say there's two ideas behind the Tokaido Road that this set of watercolors emphasizes. One, the Tokaido Road itself, as I just suggested, is historically important. It was created in the 17th century by the shogun at the time as a way to enforce stability and security. He would require that all of his domainal lords travel along this route. And there were a couple others, but this was the key route and the most famous. It connects Kyoto, which is the cultural capital of Japan, where the emperor's family has lived for centuries, to Edo, which is present-day Tokyo, which is the political capital where the shogun lived. And so the shogun would require the domain lords and their massive retinues, sometimes of up to 200 to 300 servants and other samurai that served the domainal lord, to walk these routes on an annual basis and bring their families too. And sometimes he would require that the families be left in Edo when the domainal lords returned back to their provinces to rule. And this was a security measure, again, which kept them busy. A lot of times these processions of the lords and their retinues going along these routes would become a big social event where they could show off. And the more people they had, the better equipment they had, the more important they would look. And so they're kind of more focused on doing that in their traveling, as opposed to perhaps strategizing or thinking about acts of treachery against the shogun. And so it was a really important route historically. And culturally, all of these different stations, the stations refer to, we might think of a station in terms of a train station, although people were on foot. And they refer to stopping places that were kind of known and marked as places of rest on the way up along these trails. And there are all kinds of, entertainment, opportunities and hotels and restaurants and all kinds of culture that would develop around these stations. And reflecting this was an iconic set of woodblock prints that was created in the early 18th century by one of Japan's famous woodblock artists. His name is Ando Hiroshige, usually goes by Hiroshige. He captured woodblock print images of each of these 53 stations that are really routed in the Japanese popular cultural imagination to this day. And so one of the things that these artists did, this manga artist in the 20th century, was kind of look back at that and riff on his Hiroshige's original woodblock prints and create watercolors and offer their own interpretations of what these different stations meant to Japanese society in that time, in that day. And in a sense, also kind of reflect on the fact that Japan was changing. It was no longer, the Tokaido route was no longer a walking route that was used specifically for the samurai class, but now it was a train route that connected Japan. This was a really modern, exciting technology. And so in these watercolors, the manga artists would feature trains and other modern technological developments like cars and women riding bicycles with skirts on. And so it was really kind of a celebration of the past, but also the direction that Japan was going in. I did this project originally with Josh Savari as a type of GIS story map, and I did this during the pandemic, and so it really lent itself to kind of remote work. And as I was doing this, I was telling my colleagues across North America, other colleagues who are in Japanese studies librarianship, and learned that in particular, I have a colleague at USC, University of Southern California, who has a unique set of 53 stations, woodblock prints. They're not the originals that are iconic, but a lesser known series that she had recently digitized. And we also started working with one of our colleagues at Duke University, who also, through his work, is curating and managing some materials related to the 53 stations that are lesser known. And so we decided that we would, wouldn't it be fascinating to create a digital exhibit that explored kind of the connections and the history of these lesser known works that reflect kind of the national celebration of the 53 stations across time. My colleagues' materials are mostly from the 18th century, 19th century, and mine is from the 20th century. So we're not only able to bring in different materials by different major artists and interesting creative groups, but also show how over time that artists are continuing to come back to the 53 stations to explore expressions of, patriotism or love of these iconic sites. So yes, we're creating the digital exhibit together, and it's been quite an experience. It's an unprecedented collaboration, I think. I think I told you that it's been a really interesting experience to have to work with our own teams at our respective universities. The processes are a little bit different in each place. And as I was sharing with you earlier, just at OSU, there's quite a number of boxes you have to tick off before these materials can be ready and available. And one of the other unique things about this project that we're exploring and I think piloting as an unprecedented effort is hosting our digitized images at our respective institutions on our servers, but creating a digital exhibit that will be able to call in those images onto the website and think about these things in really fun and interesting ways. We wanted to kind of bring attention to the fact that, I think in the prevailing narrative about the 53 stations, most people are really aware of that iconic set by Hiroshige, but there are so many other really fascinating and historically important pieces that are not just held at some of the major metropolitan museums and major libraries, but at some of our kind of mid-sized collections across the country. So we're hoping to bring attention to that too. In the process of creating, or in the process of getting these materials digitized, I had the opportunity to get to know them much better. And I had always known that our library actually has 2 sets. But I had never taken the time to sit down and study the 2 sets or really know exactly what that meant. But through this process, we were able to actually pull both sets out and realize that they're really unique in their own way, even though they belong to this kind of limited series that were available. I want to say that there are about 180 total. So it's a really unique opportunity to explore and know that OSU has 2 copies. And we made the decision, once we discovered that they were slightly different, to digitize both sets. And so this will be a really great opportunity for artists or historians or teachers who want to explore art and share with their students. A great opportunity for those folks to kind of compare and contrast the different pieces. I not only contacted Amy McCrory's digitization team, but also had to talk to the folks in metadata. Anna Marie Close is one of them, and her folks I worked with very closely after the images were created, making sure that we got the metadata straight. I worked with a lot of student workers also, Japanese language learners who are very strong and were able to kind of take that metadata from the Japanese and offer, not only the vernacular, the original script, but Roman transcriptions of that script, as well as English translations. And they were also working really hard on the internet, identifying what the coordinates on the map were, so that we could lay these out and know exactly where they fell and could add that to the metadata. Also talked to Dan Noonan to think about how these would be preserved and making sure that the steps we were taking through the digitization process and the collection and uploading of metadata was done in a way that we could keep these preserved and sustain all of the information that's contained in the package. We also worked with Maria Scheid, and this was to ensure that we were respecting all of the copyright issues that might present themselves, but because these scrolls were created in the very early 1920s, they were just under that moratorium date, so we were able to get a green light from Maria. The folks at Billy Ireland have always been super supportive of this process, and I had to work quite a bit with them. A couple of the prints in this project, not in the scrolls, but related prints, were backlogged and had to be ingested. And I got tremendous support from Susan Liberator and Wendy Flug in making sure that we had some of the preliminary work done that involved in ingesting these materials and getting original thumbprints. There are other institutions that have these scrolls. They are distinctive, so they're not, completely unique. But I think what is really unprecedented is that OSU does have 2 copies, and that through this process we've been able to really leverage that and share that with the public and make it available to research and teaching.